Good morning, political junkies and Americans on the edge of your seats. I'm Tim O'Brien. I'm the senior executive editor of Bloomberg Opinion, and I am here with my two colleagues, Malika-Henderson and Frank Wilkinson. They both cover politics for Bloomberg Opinion, as do I. And as you can guess, we are here today to discuss the seismic boom that went off yesterday with Joe Biden deciding to step aside in the presidential race and endorsed Kamala Harris as the standard bearer now for the Democratic Party in a contest against Donald Trump that has been a roller coaster. I don't know if roller coaster even begins to describe it. It's just been a series of wildly out of the box surprises, from Joe Biden's debate flop to an assassin fortunately failing to shoot Donald Trump at a rally recently, to Joe Biden now stepping aside. And Nia, were you surprised by this?
I was surprised, though it wasn't unexpected. I mean, I think I was talking to you maybe Thursday or Wednesday, and
in Milwaukee,
said,
we were at the
we had the
Republican National
RNC,
Convention.
and so my prediction then was, and maybe I didn't share with you, but I'll make myself look smart now. My thought was he would drop out Sunday, right, and maybe give some Oval Office address. But I sort of forgot about it. You go on your day. He had come out and said, "Oh, I'm going to be back on the campaign trail next week," because all of the headlines were saying he was going to make a decision and drop out in the next 72 hours. So I'd kind of put it away, but then you popped up in my text message saying Biden is out as I was at the park with my 4-year-old daughter. And so I do think it was stunning in the way that so much has been stunning after these, last 4 weeks in American politics. As you kicked off, it was the Biden debate collapse, the assassination attempt against Donald Trump, this last 4 days that we spent in Milwaukee, of this attempted sort of rebuild and resurrection of Donald Trump as sort of this goofy, fun guy who likes to dance at YMCA. And then this cataclysmic shift from Joe Biden, who had really lost so much support among bigwigs in his party, Nancy Pelosi chief among them, who really seemed to be pulling some strings behind the scenes. I think if you go back and you sort of look at the moment where this, started to run on to inevitability, it was when Nancy Pelosi comes out after Joe Biden's debate, after he says he's staying in there, after some people call for him to drop out. She comes out on Morning Joe and she says, at some point, Joe Biden is going to make a decision about whether or not he stays in the race. Of course, by that time, Joe Biden had made a decision, right? He'd said he had every intention to stay in the race. Her point, of course, was he hadn't made the right decision, the decision that she wanted him to make. And so you fast forward over these last 2 weeks of more people calling for him to drop out, senators, as well as folks on the House side who were worried that he would bring the whole thing down. And this is what we get. Right. And part of it is the polls and public sentiment just shifted so strongly against Joe Biden. He couldn't recover from that debate moment that we all saw and witnessed and were shocked by as well. He just couldn't get his footing even after 3 weeks of trying with press conferences and interviews. It just didn't happen for him.
Frank, just to add a little bit to what Nia just said, I think when she and I were talking in Milwaukee, it was Thursday, the day of Trump's speech, and that might not have been our first conversation about it, but we were speculating about whether or not it would be savvy politicking by Biden to make the announcement just before Trump gave his RNC acceptance speech. As it turned out, he announced it yesterday on Twitter. It doesn't appear that many people on his White House staff had much forewarning that it was coming. A lot of them found out, like the public did, through that tweet. I have written that it would have been, better for Biden to handle this in a more orderly way and to have begun sending signals a year ago that he was planning not to run again and bringing a little order to all of this. What do you think as a wise political hand?
As a wise political hand?
Yeah.
Here's what I think. Look, everything you just said is true, right? What would the ideal have been last year for Biden to say, I'm doing great, but I'm going to be 85 at the end of my second term. I think it's too much, right? Everyone knows that could have happened. He's a human being. He's a politician, which is a particular type of human being. And, that was not in his psychology. So it was so clearly not in his psychology that it took 3 weeks after the debate of concerted effort from both the very top of the Democratic Party and also the bottom of the Democratic Party, which is something, that gelled over time. But there were people who were clearly uncomfortable with Biden's age throughout this campaign. What we saw in a recent poll was 2/3 of Democrats saying that he was too old. That's not a viable position to be in if you're a Democrat, just about to take the nomination for president. So Nancy Pelosi, Barack Obama, the party leadership in the House and Senate, you had the movement at the top of the party. You had movement at the bottom of the party with the rank and file saying, we're not happy with this situation. And what we've seen really, in my opinion, is an historic event. I mean, it's a political party that is millions of people strong, sort of deciding in a collective effort that we need to make a change that has never been made before. And we need to affect this in a matter of weeks. I know that Democrats in disarray is sort of the mantra of the last 4 decades. I think it's long past its due time. I think this is an example of a party performing at absolutely the highest level to do a very, very complicated and difficult maneuver.
And it's a notable contrast to where the Republican leadership has been vis-a-vis Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. They've tolerated almost every unlawful act or heinous outburst from him over the last 9 years without really moving in any substantial way publicly to check him, whether it was Mitch McConnell in the past or Mike Johnson in the present. Party leaders do have to reflect the will of the voters, but party leaders also, should they choose to, can show a measure of steel and courage. And courage and steel have eluded Mitch McConnell and Mike Johnson repeatedly, and Nancy Pelosi, Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer, and others all rose to the moment here. Nia, do you think that it is detrimental ultimately for the GOP to be so beholden to Donald Trump, or is this just realpolitik? And he has a particularly long-lasting and historic sway over the far right of his party, and it's inevitable that they were going to cave to him.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's detrimental to the party. I think it's detrimental to the country that they are so beholden to a man who is as anti-democratic, who is as corrupt, who really traffics in racially inflammatory language and really seeks to sow division and pit one American against another American. So yes, I think it's damaging. And listen, Republicans, particularly somebody like Jeff Duncan, Liz Cheney, Mitt Romney to a certain extent, they know the reality of what has happened with their party and what the danger is that Donald Trump poses to the country. But listen, at almost every turn, you have Republicans fold to them. Mitch McConnell, you mentioned him. On the one hand, he has said that Donald Trump was essentially responsible for January 6th. His wife has been on the other end of Donald Trump's racist attacks. And yet, when it came down to it, there he was on the floor, on the convention floor at the RNC in Milwaukee, giving the go-ahead for Trump to put his name in to be the nominee. People booed him, of course, but there he was. And so the Republican Party has failed. It has turned really, I think, into a cult. And you have Donald Trump, who is their messiah, for lack of a better word. He is the one whose words they mimic his conspiracy theories. They have completely embraced. And it's frightening in so many ways to see this happen to the party we've all covered. Folks have stood by this party party, even as Donald Trump has taken it to just historic depths. And listen, he's ready to pass the torch on to J.D. Vance, who is this sort of ultra MAGA figure. And now I think Democrats who've been so afraid, sort of watching Joe Biden, holding their breath, right, as they saw him do these interviews, try to get his act together post-debate. Now there is a sense of enthusiasm, right? There was dread when it came to Joe Biden, and now there's this sense of like hope when it comes to Kamala Harris. Is there acknowledgement that it's going to be hard? She's a Black woman. You know, one of the most powerful forces, I think, in politics has been racism. Maybe the second most powerful is sexism. And here she is going to have to battle both of those forces. And so we'll see what happens. But you saw over, I think, these last 12 hours or so, the Democratic Party really get in formation, right? To quote Beyonce, around this pick. I was on a call last night. There were 40,000 Black women on a 3-hour call, right? There were a lot of glory be to God. There was a lot of tears on that and real enthusiasm around her candidacy.
You know, speaking of Trump's response to all this, I also want to remind our audience that you're free to post questions, and some of them will come to us, and I'll try to put the best ones in front of my colleagues here. Getting back to Trump's waking up to the fact that he's got a new challenger, Donald Trump also appears to want a refund. He took to social media and said that he had spent all of this money and all of this time preparing for a battle against Joe Biden, and now he's discovering it's Kamala Harris, and that's just not fair, and that's not good. And somebody please call the manager so I can get my money back. That doesn't appear to be afoot. He's certainly not going to get a refund. He may get an awakening, Frank, because I do think, as Nia just pointed out, a race that really had all of the momentum and luck trending towards Donald Trump, alongside, I think, a corruption in the courts and a kind of judicial inertia that has let him get away with sort of reckless lawlessness. But events really conspired as well to give them a boost, as we've just noticed. The debates, Biden's belly flop at the debates, and then Trump, you know, providing this bravura performance with his fist in the air the day that an assassin took a shot at him. And then I think, you know, at the RNC convention last week, there was a lot of energy as a member of the press being there. It was interesting to not feel the kind of hostility I had felt at other Trump events towards the press. It felt like it was a movement that felt comfortable in its clothing now. It believed it had arrived. It was this kind of coronation ceremony. And then poof, yesterday Biden steps down, and there is this new, I think, lift and energy behind the Democrats. But as you know, lift and energy aren't, you know, eternal things. And what do you feel about that sort of squishy idea of momentum right now?
I don't think it's a squishy idea because, first of all, there are $50 million sitting in Kamala Harris's bank account, campaign bank account right now that wasn't there at this time yesterday. That's very serious grassroots, small donor momentum. I think in this case, big donor momentum is going to follow that small donor momentum. So I expect to see money coming in as a sign of confidence and confirmation of her candidacy. I think the biggest difference is we no longer have a race of an old and seemingly tired president against an old and massively corrupt challenger. We now have a pretty young, 59 years old prosecutor running against a convicted felon, which is the message the Democrats want to bring to the fore. And we have a candidate who can prosecute that message as well. I mean, the reason that debate was so devastating for Joe Biden and led to a cascade of events that led to Sunday was that he was unable to make what to most people appears to be a very clear-cut case, which is you shouldn't have a pathological liar in the White House. You shouldn't have a convicted felon in the White House. You shouldn't have someone who is admiring Vladimir Putin all the time in the White House. So
why do you have a problem with those things, Frank?
I think that 50+1% of the American population has a problem. What I have a problem with is really not very relevant. Is that 50+1, provided they're in the correct states, right? So I think that is a case that was waiting to be made and went unmade, and that's what set off all the alarm bells in the Democratic Party. And of course, the media pile-on was part of that as well. It wasn't just a party reaction. It was a news media reaction as well. And I think, if you ask the Biden people, their version of this is he could have survived the debate. He couldn't survive the aftermath of the debate. Mm-hmm. There was a massive pile-on, and all the talking heads were saying he can't make it, they need to change. So, those 3 weeks did bring him to the psychological point and the polling point where he was able to make the decision that he made yesterday.
Well, and the AP had a very good story yesterday afternoon, shortly after the announcement, that one of the things that spurred Biden along were just these abysmal polling results from his own people that showed him collapsing in New Mexico and collapsing his poll numbers, collapsing in New Mexico and collapsing in Colorado. I think Virginia was on that list, in states where Democrats did not think they would need to fight a battle this year, and beyond the swing states. And then I think one of the things that's come up in the swing states is that there is an enthusiasm lag here, was an enthusiasm lag for Joe Biden, particularly in the cities. And as both of you know, you need to turn out Philadelphia voters in Pennsylvania. You need to turn out Milwaukee voters in Wisconsin. You need to turn out Atlanta voters in Georgia. And that there was a real dangerous softening there. So it did take him 3 weeks. There was a lot of arm twisting, but Biden also has done the honorable thing. And I think this allows his legacy to get preserved, which I think it would have been in tatters if he had stayed in the race and lost. And it gives the Democrats a new narrative for their convention, about him at least, as a wise statesman who will remain in touch and is passing the torch. But he's passing it, most overtly because he endorsed her to Kamala Harris, and she has so much going for her right now in terms of all 50 state Democratic Party leaders have endorsed her. Most of the senior bright lights of the Democratic Party have endorsed her. The money is in her corner. The machinery is in her corner. She's polled well relative to other possible contenders. Tell me a little bit about what you think are her strengths and her weaknesses coming into this moment.
Yeah. So listen, I think her strengths are she has been on the job. She's inheriting all of the apparatus from Joe Biden. She's been tested, right, on the national stage. She's been vetted. That's helpful. Listen, Kamala Harris didn't have a great 2020 campaign, and she got off to a rocky start. I think that's fair to say as vice president. But, one of the things Kamala Harris has been doing over this last year is meeting with groups of people, right? Off the record sessions at her residence. Oftentimes Doug is there. And I was, it's off the record. I was there, and she clearly understands the political landscape, understands sort of the demographics, how to put together a coalition. She obviously did that several times in California. She is going to reshape the electorate, right? We don't really know what her coalition is going to look like. Maybe she loses some of those older, more conservative voters that Biden has been doing well with, but she is going to certainly make other groups excited. Younger voters, for instance, African-American women. As I said, I was on that call, folks from the Divine Nine, all the African-American sororities and fraternities. So I do think there's that. And one thing that I think will be interesting too is she's this sort of TikTok figure now, right? She's this sort of internet sensation in a way that Joe Biden could never be, right? He had his whole like dark Brandon thing, but it was kind of hard to really for the youth to get around that. And they really have embraced Kamala Harris as this kind of fun, goofy aunt who like dances and kind of does silly things and sometimes says silly things, right? And that's okay, right? So that's, I think, a plus in her column. The negatives are she's a Black woman, right? The negatives are she's got this short window, though I think that can also in some ways be a positive. If you look at historically at women who have broken glass ceilings early on, last 100, 200 years, oftentimes they do ascend to higher office in non-traditional ways. Their husband dies, for instance, and then they run for office. This obviously isn't the same situation, but it sort of tracks historically that politically, women have had to break glass ceilings in non-traditional ways. In some ways, I think this three and a half months she has, this could be a good thing for her, right? She's got to have a great speech at the convention. I think there's going to be a huge moment when Barack Obama talks about her, when Michelle Obama talks about her, Hillary Clinton. And so in that way, I think it's good. It's also good that the RNC didn't attack her for 4 days in Milwaukee. I think the weak spots for her are going to be that she was the border czar, right? She was tasked with addressing the root causes of immigration. That's going to be a weakness. I think they're going to use her prosecutor's background in a very specific way, targeted at Black men. And in that way, she might be too conservative for Black men. That's going to be a weakness for her. And listen, again, I think the biggest thing is we don't know what it means for a Black woman to run at this level. America has never elected a Black woman governor. I have worked in politics and as a reporter for 20 years. I've only had 2 Black women bosses, right? And so I think America has to figure out, okay, what does it mean to really imagine that a Black woman could be the leader of the free world? There's so much focus on, oh, she laughs and it's awkward. It's like, well, maybe this is partly what it means to have a woman who is powerful and seeking the highest office of the land. So it is going to be hard, but there is a lot of hope and energy out there for Kamala Harris's candidacy that just didn't exist for Joe Biden.
Frank, Nia just referred to Harris as the immigration czar or the border czar. That phrase, I think it was immigration czar at the RNC.
Yeah, maybe.
But it came up in a number of the videos that the RNC played and a number of the speeches, to the extent that Harris came up, and she didn't come up that much. But when she did, it was in the context of being the border czar or the immigration czar.
Yeah.
And with the idea that obviously that immigration has been a very wide open soft spot for the Democrats up till now. Biden, I think, to his credit, over the last year, tried to address some of the myriad problems at the border to the extent that he could. He wound up with a very good bipartisan border bill that Trump tanked for political reasons, a bill that was appealing enough to Republicans that even Lindsey Graham praised it. Beyond calling, her the immigration czar, how else do you expect Team Trump to go at Harris in the incoming months? Tim Alberta has a very good piece in The Atlantic about how this upends the Trump team strategy, because they had baked in Joe Biden as their opponent, and now they have Kamala Harris. What do you make of all of that, Frank?
Well, I don't think the Republican Party under Donald Trump has ever been a mystery. They're going to say that immigrants are coming across the border, they're going to kill your family, and they're going to take your job. I mean, that is the fundamental Trump message.
And some of them are nice people. And some of them are nice people.
Yes, yeah. Well, yes, but most of them are gang members who are coming to kill you and take your job.
Yeah.
So, that's the reality of the Republican message, right? Now, the difficulty for Harris is, A, she was given the unenviable task of being the figurehead of the border control. And B, she now has the equally unenviable task of having to explain that actually border crossings are down. Mm-hmm. And actually the number of undocumented immigrants in the United States is not much higher than it was several years ago. Now, those are facts that are not going to filter down. because you're going to hear a constant barrage from Trump and Vance and others that, the MS-13 has crossed the border and they're coming to kill you. I mean, we know what their message will be. It will be that. It will be she's incompetent. She's an affirmative action hire, even though she's got far more experience than either member of the ticket on the Republican side. In fact, other than Joe Biden himself, Kamala Harris has more political experience, more public office experience than any incoming potential president since George H.W. Bush. I mean, she is a very, very experienced former attorney general of the largest state in the country, former senator. Now we've got vice president for 4 years. So I think the vice presidential part in particular is going to be key to rebut she's a Black woman, so how could she possibly be prepared for this job? Which, as Nia points out, that's coming. It's already here. They waste no time on that. On the other hand, Republican political culture, the sort of online most aggressive culture, has gotten significantly more misogynistic, and it's gotten more racist than it was in 2016. There is a kind of unleashed fury now, and that is going to be very difficult for them to keep in check. It's not, it's not the quiet words, it's not the coded language. These are people just coming out and saying it. So I think that the Republican base is going to be a difficult problem for Trump and Vance to manage.
In light of all that, Nia, who should Kamala Harris select as a running mate?
Listen, it's going to be a white guy, right? For that demographic balance, and you sort of saw this with her own addition to the ticket, and Barack Obama obviously did the same thing. So the folks you think about are Governor Shapiro out of Pennsylvania, swing state, that would be helpful. Governor Cooper out of North Carolina, he looks like a movie star version of what you think a president or vice president should look like. Governor Beshear in Kentucky, somebody who has managed to win in a red state, Kentucky. So those are the folks I think who are sort of the top three. Mark Kelly out of Arizona, he's the senator, astronaut, husband of Gabby Giffords. He could be good as well. I'm sure those conversations are going on as we speak. Vice presidents typically haven't mattered, but we are not in typical times, right? And so I think they're going to look for who can best add to this ticket, who can help Kamala Harris win these swing states and appeal to white voters and particularly white male voters, sort of assure them that they aren't excluded from this process, that they're going to have a seat at the table, which, I mean, that white guys need that assurance. I mean, okay. But yeah, I mean, that is going to be, I think that's going to be top of mind for who they're looking at. If you see these initial lists, it's literally all white men. And there's like a funny meme on Twitter where Kamala Harris is just looking at a sea of interchangeable white men. And, the caption is like, she's got a decision to make. And so I think that's what we're going to see. And we'll see when that happens, right? She's obviously been on the phone. I think last week she was down in North Carolina with Nancy Pelosi. Apparently both of them met with the governor there, Governor Cooper. Who knows how that meeting went. But I think that sort of balance demographically and regionally will help.
And Frank, one final question for you before we wrap up. What is the Democratic National Convention going to look like now that this powerhouse moment has arrived?
Well, if you presume that Harris is going to wrap this up pretty quickly, that they will probably nominate her on a telephone call prior to the convention. If that happens, then the Democrats go in knowing who their nominees are. They go in without any of this convention fight nonsense or contest, and they have 4 days to make the case that Donald Trump is fundamentally unfit to be president, which, everyone from John Bolton, his national security advisor, and, Mark Esper, his Secretary of Defense, have made that case, and you'll have Democrats making it as well. If you can get Liz Cheney, for instance, to make that case, you have the potential for a very, very compelling 4-day argument that this is a campaign of the future versus the past, a campaign of progress versus reaction, and a campaign, once again, of a prosecutor and a rule of law party, a democratic party, versus an increasingly dangerous authoritarian party.
Mia Malika-Henderson, Frank Wilkinson, thanks for joining us today. I'm Tim O'Brien. We are all of Bloomberg Opinion, and we want to thank all of you for joining us. We'll be back soon to talk about more the aspects of this extraordinary political season. Thanks for joining us.